Hi, I'm Tom Power, and welcome to Toy Heart, a podcast about bluegrass. Hi, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for streaming or downloading, and thanks for your feedback on the past few weeks of our tribute to Tony Rice. This has been really lovely, and your comments and messages and DMs have meant a lot to us. If you want to get in touch and let us know what you've been thinking or anything that's on your mind, drop us a line. We're on Instagram at Toy Heart Podcast. You can drop us a line on the Bluegrass Situation Facebook page. You can find us on the Bluegrass Situation website. There's no shortage of ways to get in touch, and we'd love to hear from you. If you missed part 1 and 2 of the tribute, you can find it in your podcast feed on Spotify or on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find our interviews with folks like Del McCurry, Alice Gerard, and Jesse McReynolds. We love doing Toy Heart, and I'm so looking forward to season 2 once the border opens up and things get back to normal. So please hit subscribe and tell a friend who is into this music. Part 3 of our tribute to Tony Rice is an interesting one because, as has been pointed out in all the discourse around Tony Rice, his music will live on. And it will live on through some of the musicians you'll hear today. Some knew Tony, some played with him, but every single one of them was influenced by him. Chris Thile, Chris Critter Eldridge, Molly Tuttle, and Bryan Sutton. Starting first with Chris Thile, who, along with folks like Tony Rice, is what you might call a transformational figure in the music. There's like a before Chris Thile and after Chris Thile. But what I love about our chat is that he talks about being so cautious, so nervous around Tony, until one night. He'll tell you that story. Here's my conversation with Chris Thile. So Chris, I guess to start things off, I'm just so sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for the loss of your friend.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I mean, it's for me, you look back at all the times that you could have more actively sought out his company. You know, there were times he was, as I'm sure you've heard from a lot of people, he was a hard guy to know. But I had opportunities. He was always he was super generous with me, but I was still kind of scared of him a little bit. You know, always ever since I was little. So I would get to see a set of his at these California bluegrass festivals that my folks would take me to, maybe like the Grass Valley Festival, and maybe I'd get to play, maybe like Tim O'Brien and Pete Warnick would come out and say hi after a show, and I would always sort of a little pipsqueak there with the mandolin like out of its case all the time, just waiting to show someone that I could play. And those guys might get an instrument and start playing. And Tony would be around, like you'd see him always in the suit and with the good cologne and he's sort of regally smoking a cigarette or whatever he was doing. And he might look interested. He wasn't going to take the guitar out. And that was etched in my mind back then as these incredible sets with the Tony Rice unit, and then maybe seeing him, but inaccessible, compared to some of these other people. And then come to, I was a little bit later. Let's see. I was older. I was at I feel like maybe at Merl Fest in Wilbur, North Carolina. There was like just one time, all of a sudden he's just like, "Hey, Chris." I was like, going, like he noticed me, that he knew my name, and was just so genial, talking to me like I heard him talk to Bela or Jerry, with the same kind of like he's always about to crack a joke of some kind and doesn't quite. Like he's almost about to.
How old were you there?
And from then on, I think maybe 14, 15. But we hadn't played yet. I think it wasn't until, I'm trying to remember the first time would have been actually on stage.
I saw a video this morning of, you were pretty young. It was you and Nickel Creek and Tony doing Molly and Ten Brooks.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the first couple times, Bayless had such a spot on. One of Bayless' tweets about Tony after this was so dead on, where basically Tony just made you feel like a superhero. Whenever you play with him, it would always be the best you could play.
Why is that? Like what did he give that allowed for that?
There's some sort of there's a way that you try to back someone up, and I think people forget about this. Especially in that there's the competitive aspect of improvisatory music, where you're like waiting for your solo. You're like waiting to show people what you can do, and the best players are never like that. They're only. He had this sort of like Terry Gross-like ability to just ask the perfect question, just set the soloist up. Whoever was playing, whoever was being featured, it was like Tony had just set them up with the perfect question that he knew they could answer. Or he knew that they would provide. It's not a perfect analogy, but he knew that he was asking you a question that you were the perfect person to answer, and you would provide like a very enlightening answer. That's how it always felt. That his playing underneath you, or like there's lots of different analogies we could use. Like it was like a trampoline, or depending on what was appropriate, you just felt like he had magically set you up for the most success. You felt bulletproof playing with that man, bulletproof. And to me, it's actually that rhythm playing, as profound as every aspect of his musicianship was and is, when we still get to interact with it. Thank God. But no one ever felt like he did rhythmically. Like no one sounds like, you would never confuse someone else for Tony Rice based on their rhythm guitar playing. They might trick you into thinking it's him on the soloing. Playing that incredible, taking one of those licks that he would play. They're like an arrow, and so you could take that arrow out of your quiver and shoot it and hit the bullseye. But the rhythm playing was so unique, so enigmatically him. And that was the thing that would just send any piece of music he was a part of into the stratosphere, as far as I'm concerned. Is that rhythm guitar playing under his singing, or under anyone else's singing, or under anyone else's playing. And again, it's that sensitivity, and it's the infinite interactivity of that playing, that he's constantly listening to. It feels like a whole other, there's like another person attached to him, and that his guitar and what he's playing is a whole other Tony Rice, in addition to the Tony Rice that is him. And he would make you feel like a superhero, and you realize listening after the fact that it was owing to that, again, that just extraordinary sensitivity and touch on the instrument, and his ability to process all of the music being made around him, to understand what someone had just said, to understand it very deeply, and then make a comment on it or ask a question based on that thing that they had just posited, instrumentally or vocally. Just extraordinary. So when I think about something like playing Molly and Ten Brooks with Tony, it instantly goes into that feeling, like this state of being, no musician who has ever played with Tony has ever felt more supported, and it's
and free, and a great sense of freedom.
So free. You could play. Yeah, it's not that you would play. It's not like he was like giving you a dotted line to trace. It was yeah, again, it was just like this. I hear you, and your thing is perfect for this moment. Is kind of like what you were hearing from Tony Rice when you were playing with him.
What do you hear when you hear him sing?
The words. Like you actually hear every single word. It's no artifice, no, you hear a total lack of self-consciousness when he's singing. Like there's no, it's like it's Buddhist. It's like there's no self. He's not wrapped up in the self of singing. He's just, here's this song that I love, and I want to share it with you. Here's this song that I love. That's what I hear when I hear Tony Rice singing. Is like, this is a great song that I think you should hear. And he doesn't. There's no like vocally things. He's not adorning it. There's not this like, here I go, and though he had an incredible, like, that sound was amazing, and we know now how much he was straining while he was singing, which is really, you can hear it late as we get late. Like, you can hear it on Tony Rice Plays and Sings. You can hear the strain, but it's the furthest thing from your mind. Maybe up until whenever you start hearing that little edge come in, it seemed like the most natural thing in the world, like the rhythm guitar playing felt. You can, to my ear, you can hear the strain, the physical strain in the solo playing. You can hear the I'm going to say the word struggle, but I don't mean that it sounds like he's struggling. Just that it's like it. You can hear the physical nature of how he approached the guitar, and I think I actually think that's part of what's so arresting about it. Is to hear someone out on the edge of what is physically possible for a human being to do. It's like the difference between like a Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer. Like Federer, you're struck by just how natural it all looks. How like it's possibly easier for Federer to hit a forehand than it is for him to sit in a chair. And Nadal gives you like there's the struggle, like the physical struggle of playing tennis. And I feel like Tony Rice's soloing on the guitar is like watching Nadal play tennis, as opposed to like Federer, where maybe that's more like like an O'Connor playing fiddle kind of. Federer is more like an O'Connor playing fiddle sort of a feeling.
Yeah, effortless seems to be somewhat attached to him, an extension of himself. Yeah. Speaking, yes. But
like he's singing at before we started hearing that the wear and tear show up, also struck me as just, again, to take self totally out of it and just hear the song. It's really, and that's like what winemakers are trying to do at this point. Like, you're just trying to taste the earth that these grapes come from. Like, you're trying to taste that place and that time, and not like what the winemaker did in the wine cellar. And I think vocalists often are like, they're like really showy, big giant California Cabernets or whatever. When what we really want is or what I really want is to just taste, like, is there limestone in that soil? Like, what's going on? What's the climate like there? And what was the year like? That's so much more interesting, I think, than high alcohol and high sugar and I feel like Tony is just that, like, he's that Burgundy approach to winemaking. Like, you taste, you feel like you hear the soil and the vintage of that song. I
wonder if you could talk about that Merl Fest jam. After Tony died, you wrote, "Thank you for everything, especially that one session after the Midnight Jam at Merl Fest forever ago. I hope you don't mind if I imagine you growling picket son every time I attempt to play one of your tunes." I wonder if you could tell me that story.
Yeah, man. So the Midnight Jam at Merl Fest was, we looked forward to that every year, and you never knew like what people would actually see. So it was this very organized and often fairly lifeless performance late Saturday at Merl Fest. And like what actually made it out onto stage was rarely what was so amazing about it for all of us. And I wish it could be another way, but it can't necessarily be another way, because you just got a bunch of people back there loving each other's company, and usually it was festival participants whose the bulk of their work was already done, so they could really let their hair down and just have fun backstage. And a lot of times people wouldn't even play; they just sit back there and hang out and talk to their friends that they maybe hadn't seen for a while. It was always a really good shrimp cocktail. I remember it being really good.
That's all I wanted to know. That's all I wanted to hear about. So that's good. I'm good,
great,
actually. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And Tony thought the shrimp cocktail was also good. That was the moment. It was really nice.
Anyway, nice to talk to you.
So yeah, thank you so much. So Tony, I had never seen Tony at the thing before. And usually, like you're saying, like Tony would do what he needed to do and be really sweet. Like if you saw him between it was a Lincoln, right? Between the Lincoln and the stage, he would be super sweet. And there were times when there were a couple beautiful times where we'd be at these provincial festivals somewhere. I wouldn't even remember what the names of them were, but I remember him being on tour with Pete Rowan and just asking me, hey Chris, you want to play this one with us? I was just like, what? You mean just like come up? Yeah. Come on. And so like I go up like 4 songs in or whatever and play a song, and he just looks at me like don't go, like go. I start kind of, I don't want to overstay, right? But I couldn't quite tell. And I'm like, so I start to kind of back away, and he's like, no, come on. We play like 9 Pound Hammer and Salt Creek, things like that. So that was maybe the first moment where I felt like he wanted to play some music with me. But still there would be these very odd experiences. And finally I'd like step off stage and he'd get back into that car and off he'd go. And that would be it until the next time I'd see him. And again, he'd always be really sweet, but the music making would happen in a sit-in kind of a situation on stage. And except for this one night at Merl Fest, way towards the end of the Midnight Jam, and Tony came in. I mean, I want to say the whole thing was over at that point. Like the actual, like what we were doing in front of people was done, and it was just musicians hanging out, lots of them. And in the back there, I think it was, I remember for sure that it was Tony and Tim O'Brien and me, and I think it was Mark Schatz playing bass. And I feel like, I can't necessarily remember. So I think Tim was playing fiddle.
Right.
And there would have been another person or two. Might have been Pete Warnick playing banjo. But I mean, I was so locked onto this moment with Tony, and Tim. And so what the crazy thing that happened that I didn't get into on that social media post is that Tony had, he hadn't had a voice for years at that point. Just kind of, again, his growling speech that he would do. But I hadn't heard him sing or knew of anyone who had heard him sing for a long time at that point. He was playing, and I don't even know how, like, what prompted him to get the guitar out. I'd never seen him do that. Like, just decide to start jamming. I know that people like Jerry and Bela and that they would have seen him in that mode. Sam obviously would have seen him in that mode where, like, yeah, let's pick. Mm-hmm. But I had never seen him like that. It was always like a professional thing, and he would have fun on stage. And like that magical moment I talked about at the little tiny festival, like he was having fun and interacting. And again, I felt 10 Foot Tall and Bulletproof playing with him, but I had never seen him just like, I want to play music right now. And I just want to play music. And that was he kept saying that. Oh, I want to pick. Let's play another one. And he started. So he was like, Timmy, sing one. And so Tim starts singing, and the chorus comes along, and I had been singing some tenor here and there. Oh boy,
was standards?
Yeah, just standards. Like probably. I want to say it was like Little Cabin Home on the Hill or something. Right. And so we'd been doing things, just things like that. And Tony was like suggesting the songs too. So he was taking a very, like, a leadership role in this jam. And you could tell he knew that it was a moment, and he knew that it was a moment for us. And it felt like something out of the Lord of the Rings, man. Like this moment where the hero knows he needs to be the hero. And just goes for it. And like I felt like there was fanfare surrounding every one of these declarations. Like, and now we shall play Little Cabin Home on the Hill. It's how it felt. And there was a 20 elf salute for this moment. But it's how it felt. It felt so epic. And this moment, and again, I think it was a Little Cabin Home on the Hill, or it was something like that. It really does not matter. It does not matter. What matters is that we get to the chorus, and I had been singing a little bit of tenor with Tim. Just when we get to the chorus, no one else was, so I decided, well, I'll do it. And we get to the chorus, and I go into the tenor, and all of a sudden there's Tony just singing baritone, like he just started in. And as far as maybe little isolated events like this had happened here and there that other people had been a part of, but no one in that room had heard him sing since he had lost his voice so publicly. And he started singing this beautiful, husky, scratchy, but him.
It was there.
Baritone. It was there, and it was gorgeous. And it was, Tim fucking Bryan singing lead. So you've got Tim singing lead and Tony singing baritone, and like with those kind of J.D. Crowe like baritone lines, only with, again, just perfection. More, but more of a singer than J.D. What J.D. is such an incredible baritone singer, but when it's Tony there, just all of that toniness. It was incredible. And he just decided to keep going, and he would call out another vocal song, and every time he'd come in with the baritone part. And I'd also never really heard him singing. Maybe I'd hear singing baritone is where I was going to go with that. Maybe I'd heard him sing a little baritone on board tapes from like dry Bela Fleck's Drive era board tapes where Sam Bush might do some lead singing.
Yeah, I think some bluegrass album band stuff where Doyle takes the lead or something like that.
Maybe Doyle takes the lead. Yeah. Doyle might take the lead here and there. And so, but the jam, it lasted maybe 2 hours and felt like it was over in 5 minutes. And at the end of that jam session, and again, I'd had these really nice, encouraging interactions with Tony, but at the end of that jam, he gave me a big hug and he said, "I love you, man." Like and that's kind of that's the last time I got to play with him, I think, except maybe just a couple more times on stage. It might be the only time I really got to do that, the sort of playing that that creates that creates that kind of feeling, like with another musician. It there's a certain amount of that can happen on stage, but only a certain amount. Like it's so public. But like, you know, you fall in love with someone in private, and musicians fall in love with each other in private. And it does feel like that. You know, I mean, I guess it's not in love, but like that love that comes, this familial love that could, like, this, the blood is thicker than water feeling of like, we have now connected in a way that is in, you know, that can't be severed. It was I felt it forged between us that night, and you know, we never got. I don't feel like we ever got to do that again. Not in that way.
Did you get to speak to him again? Did you remember the last time you spoke to him?
Yeah, I think the last time I spoke to him was at Dune Grass in Michigan. This is a long time ago, maybe 12 years ago, maybe more. Somewhere in the like 12 to 13 years ago zone, and he was a super sweet, and it was with Critter. Critter was there too.
This was Punch Brothers.
He was always yeah. This was early Punch Brothers gig, and Tony was playing. He played beautifully that day. Again, such touch. He had, you know, he had lost a lot of facility at that point, but the stuff that made him was stronger than ever. There was some of the most ridiculously enlightened rhythm playing that he ever delivered were you know, towards the end of his hands still working, because his mind kept working, and his love of music was profound. And that's something that I heard about more through Critter than I actually experienced myself. You know, Critter got all those incredible lengthy one-on-one sessions, whereas for me, like, as far as the real personal music making, it was that night at Merl Fest. But what a night. you were
at Dune Grass, and you guys got to talk and say hi.
Yeah, we talked. He handed us Critter and then me the herringbone.
The guitar. Okay.
That was the only time I got to play that guitar. The guitar. Yeah, that was the only time I ever got to play it. And
how was it?
It was well, I mean, what I could hear of it was incredible, but it was backstage, and it was like, I mean, it was something like loud jam band on or something. But to feel it under my hands, and like, you feel it vibrate, you kind of know what it sounds like based on how it's feeling in your body. And I could, you know, I was putting my ear up to Critter playing it, and Tony didn't play it at all. Back there, just handed it to Critter, and then I got a turn with it as well.
What did you play?
And oh God, I think I just probably just like a little. I would think it was like. So I'm already not really a guitar player. Like, I can do it, but it's not really my thing. So I probably just played like a little St. Anne's Reel or something.
Right.
You know, just like a fiddle tune, and nothing of Tony's, and no Tony licks for sure. But you know, there was a time when I would sit down with the guitar and try and learn all the Tony licks, because you can play them on mandolin, of course, but the physical sensation is not as satisfying.
Before we go, and you've been very generous, paint me a picture when you think of them. Paint me a picture of what comes to mind, your sort of lasting image in your mind of Tony Rice. What do you see?
that I see first. I see the. I mean, it's like the ponytail and a red tie and a dark suit, and his face, you know, so still, just looking down at the guitar, the way that he would look down at that guitar, and like with more focus than, you know, I've ever seen in one person. And that little wry grin that he would give Sam or Jerry or Bela or Mark or Mark Schatz when they did something that he liked on stage. That's what I see.
Well, you know, it's been a joy to talk to you. And to go back to what you were saying earlier, that, like, you know, will Tony ever really die? If his music is still with us and his influence is still with us, and I'll echo that and add that what a legacy he's left through you and through your music and through your companions as well. So thanks a lot for your time, and thanks a lot for telling us your memories of your friend.
That's what a man. We love you, Tony. We miss you so much.
Thank you so much to Chris. I mean, you got to imagine that Chris Thile has played like 2,000, 3,000 like unbelievable life-changing concerts for the people in the audience. But like to know that it was a backstage jam with Tony Rice that like has imprinted on his memory so profoundly, it just goes to show the power of this music, especially the power of the informal nature of this music. So thanks so much to Chris for making the time. I do really appreciate it. Up next, we have a bandmate of Chris's in the Punch Brothers, Chris Eldridge, or Critter. He was one of the first people everyone thought about, I think, or at least in my social circle, everyone thought about after Tony Rice's death. Because not only is he a disciple of Tony, not only is his guitar playing influenced by Tony, but he knows him really well. In fact, he spent time with Tony Rice. He lived with him for a little while, learned everything he could, and got some really interesting perspective on who Tony Rice was. And he's going to share that with you right now. Critter joined us from his home in Nashville. Critter, thanks for doing this. It's a nice. I'm sorry for you. I'm just sorry for you. I know how close he was to you.
Yeah, he was outside my kind of immediate blood family, I think, or my step parents. Like, I don't think there was a person who was more influential on my development as a person and kind of what my soul was all about than Tony. You know, he was like an uncle in a way, but he was also kind of like this incredible guide.
Can you tell me more about that, like in terms of what your soul was all about?
Well, what I mean by that is that he kind of redirected my ideas about what music is, what music can express, why music is important, and kind of how it can be a vehicle, an incredible vehicle for self-expression, and how, you know, you can really tell a lot about a person by the way they play music, and that, you know, playing music well, it could even be a way to kind of make yourself a better person. You know, I think with Tony there was so much. Well, first of all, when I kind of came to him, he kind of took in. I'd known him my whole life. He's the one who kind of brought back the nickname Critter and everything and all that. And I started really hanging out with him when I was when we kind of really rebonded. He'd become a hero to me by the time I was 14, and the Seldom Scene would play with the Tony Rice unit every New Year's Eve, and maybe they'd do another show at the Birchmere. But that was at least an annual thing.
But was he just like another bluegrass musician that your dad knew, like as far as you knew, like just another, Well,
when I was a kid, there was some of that, and then at a certain point, I think when I started paying attention to any of it, Tony kind of stood out a little bit, just because he carried himself very differently. He wasn't unlike Mike Aldridge in that way, whereas they both, dressed beautifully and carried themselves in a certain way, and the sound that they both would render was so clear and so strong and individual. So I think in that way Tony always stood out. But once I kind of took to playing music myself, and particularly playing guitar, because I decided I wanted to be a guitar player, Tony really, as soon as that was a thing at all, he kind of blew my mind. You could tell even from a young age, before I got into acoustics or got into playing his music, it was like he was just a titan, and seeing him was I have very clear memories of seeing Tony Rice playing at like the Graves Mountain Festival of Music, with the unit, and just it being this kind of impossibly, it was like Zeus was up there or something. I mean, he had that kind of presence. But then as I kind of got a little bit older and got more into his thing, he was always really nice to me. He was super nice to kids. He was always very encouraging. He was actually a lovely teacher in a way. My brother and I were reminiscing about that. My brother Ben is he's 54 now, I think, or he's about to turn 54. So he and I grew up. I'm 38. We grew up kind of separately. We didn't share all these experiences. But Ben was a great guitar player, and he has a lot of memories of hanging out with Tony, because Tony back in those days would stay with my family, like before I was born. And so he and Tony would like hang out and pick sometimes. And Tony, he was saying Tony was just always so nice and cool and encouraging. And
it sounds like Tony and your dad got along too.
Oh yeah, they were definitely buddies. My dad knew him from the early days of the Seldom Scene, and they were crossing paths with the Bluegrass Alliance, and then J.D. Crowe in the New South, and Tony just became, it was all, he was a great guy, and he was a member of the community. What ultimately was a pretty tight-knit community. The community that I can relate to from my time growing up as a musician, like when I was in the String Dusters, and I think about seeing Uncle Earl out at a festival, or there are a million bands like that. We were just all kind of baby bands together, and I think maybe the Seldom Scene and like J.D. Crowe in the New South kind of had a similar, and Newgrass Revival once they got going. I think it was a similar kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, Tony was always a friend. He was actually going to join the Seldom Scene, by the way.
Really?
Yes. John Starling, I think in maybe 75, was going to leave the band, and the plan was, and this was, they'd arranged, I mean, this was the plan, is that Tony Rice was going to be the lead singer and guitar player for the Seldom Scene.
Would that mean that he would stop? Like, because I know the thing about the Seldom Scene is that they all had other gigs. Like your dad was a prof, John Duffy repaired instruments. Was Tony gonna become a wheelwright or something like that?
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, well, he might have been a watchmaker. Who knows? In his off time. But yeah, he was going to join the band. And so they made a record together. There was like some of the guys from the scene, my dad and Aldridge and Tom Gray. And John Starling produced it. Duffy didn't play on that record. Larry Rice played on it. But this record, California Autumn, where you can sort of hear some of what that might have been like. But anyway, Starling decided that he wanted to stick around. So he wound up not leaving when he was planning on it. And Tony, meanwhile, played on this Bill Keith record, met Grisman, and heard what Grisman was kind of conceiving of, and everything kind of changed. Tony wound up, Starling stuck around. Tony moved to California, and the rest is kind of history. But yeah, they were buddies,
So you were saying that you were, when your brother was playing with him, and he would stick around and jam a little bit with your brother, and then you sort of, Tony when you're a kid, and you grow up, and you sort of take on the guitar, and Tony sort of re-enters your life as less of your dad's buddy and more of like perhaps like a figure, more.
Yeah, he was definitely a hero,
an aspirational figure,
Definitely an aspirational figure, kind of larger than life. I mean, he was someone that you could, a hero. I mean, I think a hero is a fair way of saying it, especially when you're that age. You're so impressionable, and that's kind of, I think, a lot of who we make ourselves. We can. Tony actually had a great thing on his Twitter handle. It said "invent yourself," and we do kind of invent ourselves somewhat, I think, whether we realize it or not. And at that age, I had people to look up to. I saw Tony Rice, and I was like, "Wow, that's amazing. This guy is really incredible." And he kind of loomed really large in my conscience, from then on. And so I got really serious about studying him. And I was kind of more into it through the jazz side of things because I wasn't, I didn't want to play bluegrass. My mom and dad both played banjo. That was the last thing I wanted to do, was have anything to do with playing bluegrass, even though of course I loved it. But I kind of got into it. And then as I got older, I started playing with the Seldom scene. And I kind of thought, you know what, if I'm going to be sitting in, it was pure nepotism, but it was like, if I'm going to be sitting in with these guys, I should actually be able to, be a little bit legit on playing some more proper bluegrass. So I started studying Tony, and it became this incredible school because, it's not that hard to learn the notes that Tony plays in those sequences. It was a lot technically easier to get the notes out than all the other music I was trying to play before that, all this crazy jazz fusion or Bela stuff with the flecktones or whatever. And but what became really interesting to me, I got that stuff pretty quickly, but then the task was like, well, how it doesn't sound like Tony when I play these notes. Like, why does it sound so much better? And it kind of turned into a task for a while of like really going like super deep into studying the deepest nuances I could at the time of like why does his timing feel so good? Let me see if I can like incorporate that timing. And so that was around the time that Tony and I really reconnected. I was super duper deep into his thing, and I really could, I could sound at that point, when I was like maybe 19, a lot like 18, maybe a lot like Tony. Studied his records and had all the little inflections down. And I think he thought that was kind of cool that that my copying of his thing wasn't cheap. He could see that I was kind of going in and looking deeper to try and, just investigate a little deeper. And so
like
I think
he did with Clarence, it sounds like.
Exactly. And I think he appreciated that. And I think that was kind of what opened the door to me in terms of our relationship, because he was like, oh, this kid actually, he kind of cares. He's looking a little deeper than I think a lot of people who were copying his thing. And so then college came around, and I had this opportunity to create a course of study at Oberlin for winter term. And I called Tony up, and we'd kind of had this great weekend together at Merl Fest, where we'd really kind of properly bonded. I'd seen him at shows, and he was always nice to me. But at Merl Fest in 2001, that's where we really kind of bonded. We stayed up a bunch and stayed up really late, and then that next January is when I kind of went down and stayed with him at his house, and he kind of really took me under his wing, kind of as like a student, basically.
Now, what I find interesting about that is you didn't play together. Part of you went down there for college as part of a sort of a self-assigned thing, and went down and learned from Tony Rice. You would think that would be a lot of you with the D18 on your knee and him with his, and you guys are playing June Apple a bunch. You know? It's really interesting to me that you're learning from him. There was almost no picking.
There was no pick. Which is not to say that we never, like, the guitar went back and forth a few times, when we'd talk about something and he would kind of show me something or show me about touching a guitar in a certain way that you can like kind of coax sound out of a guitar. But yeah, I think Well, again, I think because he recognized that I'd kind of gone so deep on that thing that he was doing at that, earlier on. I remember him telling me one time. I remember him saying, "There's no point in me trying to, show you how to play Gold Rush." Like, he almost was disdainful of that kind of thing. He what he was interested in, I think he was like, okay, this kid really loves music, obviously, and really, has figured out a bunch of stuff about the guitar. He's going to know how to play guitar. And he's going to figure it out for himself. That's going to be fine. But maybe I can kind of guide him in terms of, I feel like what Tony gave me was he shared. It was all about sharing wisdom. That was the nature of that experience. I think.
Can you give me an example of something you learned from Tony that you still apply to your playing to this day?
Oh God, I mean everything. Yeah. I mean, one thing that springs to mind is, I remember him saying once. So I was young, and I was really interested in being like a hotshot guitar player too. Like I really, I was still a teenager, and so I wanted to. I had all this Eric Johnson and stuff I'd been listening to as a kid, and I could kind of do some of it on acoustic guitar. And I never really heard anybody do that before, and it sounded neat to me. I was like, and I remember Tony telling me one time I was sitting in his basement playing Cattle in the Cane, playing all these crazy big intervals and stuff, and it's fast. And he said, Critter, like, what the hell are you doing? He was like, in essence, he was saying, don't forget the whole goal, the whole reason, to do this is not to play crazy guitar. It's not about you. It's not about all that. It's to collaborate with your fellow musicians to make sounds that are pleasant to the ear. And
wow.
And that was, it's almost like a Zen koan, like it sounds like kind of trite on the surface, but man, you can just think about that and sort of meditate on it. And it's actually pretty deep. That will guide you through a lot of stuff.
Especially in music like yours, like bluegrass music can often be one-uppy.
Yeah.
It can be someone plays a solo. It might be unspoken. It is unspoken. But it's, you want to play a better one. You want to show what you can do. If someone you respect is in the jam, you want to show, that's quite profound, especially for the genre,
Totally. And which is not to say that he also, that what you're saying about bluegrass is totally true. I mean, it's absolutely baked into the most fundamental DNA of the music, because this music was created by Bill Monroe, who grew up as this isolated, cross-eyed child who his parents were embarrassed by, who had him hide under the house, when he was a kid. And so he kind of always had this chip on the shoulder of, I'm going to show you guys what I can do. I'm going to be the man. And that's just part of what bluegrass actually is. I mean, that's baked into it. And Tony definitely learned that lesson as well as anybody. I mean, when he took a solo, it's like everybody knew, just sit back. He's going to step up. But I think what he was actually way more interested in than that, in terms of what he actually cared about, was enlivening the music and lifting everybody else up, making his fellow musicians as comfortable as they could be, and kind of prodding them into being better. I mean, the way that he played rhythm guitar, everybody you talk to who played with Tony, everybody I've ever talked to, says the same thing. They just say it was so easy. It was so easy. And you also, so that's one thing that is like a shared experience, at least based on what I've heard. But then as a listener, I feel like you can go listen to those things and try and study it. And you hear Tony completely reacting. If somebody's taking a solo, you'll hear Tony, reacting to that in a certain way. It's not that he was just up there kind of playing great timing. He was kind of, it was a dialogue. If somebody did something, he would react to it, and then that whoever the soloist was or whatever, they would react to that, and it's not even a one-upsmanship. It's just it's more of a conversation, and more of something where it kind of brings everybody to life, a surprise, and you kind of, your eyes open a little bit more, and you're just paying a little bit more attention. And I think he was the greatest at that, because he would throw in all these incredible, unexpected, rhythm things in his rhythm guitar, weird chords, weird syncopations, timing things, even as the flow was just right there. So it was easy. Everybody says it's so easy, but he was also just kind of getting in there, jabbing and doing all these cool things.
I think he was also a great mentor for people in how to navigate music, not just how to play music, but how to navigate music.
Yeah.
So did you ever talk to him about Punch Brothers? Did you ever talk to him?
Not really, I mean, a little bit. I talked to him. I definitely. So Tony, as you may know, it's a common theme with people who knew him, is that he kind of fell out of touch with people, even people he was extremely close with, and that happened with me too. Like, we were very close for a period of 3 or 4 years. I mean, we'd talk on the phone very regularly. I'd stayed with him, rode cross country with him. He was like my mentor. He was like almost like an uncle or something. And then one day kind of quit texting me back and quit calling me back, and it really hurt my feelings for a while. I mean, I'd grieve it until I realized, he's done this with literally everyone else I know who knows him. But so I remember calling him up when I kind of had this opportunity to leave the String Dusters, or not to leave the String Dusters, when I had this opportunity to join Punch Brothers. We'd started working on music together, and it very quickly became obvious that there was something special about that ensemble, and the opportunity for growth for me was massive. But then again, the String Dusters truly felt like brothers to me. I mean, I loved those guys, and we really came of age together, me and Pandolfi especially, and I really loved them. And so and we'd kind of gone into this thing together. And so I called. It was really two things pulling on me hard. I'd never experienced anything like this in my life, and to this day, I don't know if I've had that kind of conflict within myself. And so I called Tony. I was like, "Hey, man, I need your help. Can you please call me up?" And of course, if you needed him, he was there. So, and I talked to him, and he said, if you have the opportunity to go grow like that, if you have the opportunity to, be in a band with Chris Thile, who's on fire right now, his brain is just exploding with all this stuff. He's like, you gotta do that. You gotta follow that opportunity. And I really appreciated that advice, and I kind of knew it already, but that was really validating and important. We didn't really talk much about Punch after that. I mean, by that point we were pretty out of touch. I talked to him over the years occasionally, but it was mostly pretty short, or I would see him somewhere, and he would kind of, I always knew that Tony loved me. That was never a thing that I ever doubted for a second, even till the end. But it was like he kind of just didn't. A lot of times he just kind of wanted to keep moving.
When was the last time you spoke?
The last time I talked to him was not quite 2 years ago. It was about it was February of 2019. It was whenever John Starling passed away, and I sent something to Pam, and he called me, later that night or the next day, and I talked to him for not that long, probably 10, 15 minutes, but just kind of heard, it was nice to talk to him, kind of heard what was going on in his life a little bit, as far as he would share any of that, which wasn't that much, but he was just such a he had such a kind heart. I mean, yeah. I kind of always knew him in this way where he was, he kind of he really took me under his wing, so there however you want to define that kind of relationship, like he took me under his wing. But I always knew him as this guy with this really just warm, kind heart. I can't find better words than that. and very sensitive. He was such a sensitive person. And so we just had this really sweet conversation, just about some kind of deep, heartfelt stuff there. And that was the last time I spoke to him. And I would send him, it's so funny. I'd send him, texts every now and then, like on his birthday or just whenever I was thinking about him. And, if you scroll through my text messages, it'd be like 10 green bubbles on the right side of my iPhone. Then every now and then there'd be one gray one where he'd write back like every 3 years in all caps, because he texted in all caps all the time, except for T, he'd sign his name in lowercase. Or, but yeah, so I was mostly out of touch. But I feel like when we did connect, it was always really nice and felt very real.
Well, I'll close off with the three. You've been really generous, and I appreciate this.
Yeah.
I'll close off with the sort of three questions I've been asking everybody at the end of this thing. They're a bit hard, but I've been enjoying the answers we've been getting from him. What was he like?
Care to guide that question anymore?
No.
Okay. Well, he was extremely. I think more than anything, when I think about Tony, I think about kind of the spirit of Tony. And that's how I relate to his music, but that's also how I related to him as a person. And he always struck me as like a very proud, very kind of singular spirit. He was like kind of nice and sociable, but also kind of a loner. I think very content to be left with himself.
Drove by himself in the nighttime after the gigs,
Yeah. He was extraordinarily intelligent. He was very smart. He was not just very smart, but he was very articulate. I think he was a very articulate thinker. In other words, he in his intelligence, there was a real clarity to the way his mind worked. He had this really rich but very clear thinking mind, which I think is really reflected in his music. I mean, you can hear that sense of clarity and how he presents his singing and his playing and everything. And he had a really warm heart. He had a really funny sense of humor. He was a funny guy. He was like kind of quirky, like almost like absurd sense of humor, where he'd say these ridiculous things over and over throughout the just throughout your time with him.
Bela told me he would say "you look marvelous" all the time, and he said,
"Oh yeah, darling." Yeah, he called everybody darling,
until it was funny again.
Yeah, exactly. He was like the original. I don't know, not Tim and Eric, but yeah, something like that. He kind of appreciated that absurd sense of humor.
What made his playing so special?
I think what made his playing so special was a combination of two things. One is that he was just so good. It's like Steve Martin says, "Be so good they can't ignore you." Tony was so good that he grabbed your attention. There's certain musicians like that where, his command of technique and timing and all these fundamentals were so good that he got your attention. You kind of had to pay attention to it. But ultimately, I kind of feel like that's not actually what the most incredible thing was. That pulled you in, but what actually made him the greatest ever is that it was all an expression of his spirit. It's like he really valued music, I think, as a medium for understanding who someone was, and that was something he talked about. He definitely would talk about that sort of thing a lot. And I think he strove to impart himself on the music. He strove to kind of like just be himself when he was doing it, and strove to be so honest in that way. And I think that's part of why he was so good. It wasn't just that he played great and he sang great. It's that it was all so honest, and that's why we all care. That's why that's music that has moved us, and why, it's never going to get old. We're going to be 90 years old and still be able to hear like this person's soul, basically their spirit and what they cared about. You can hear that he's so honest, and it's like red beans and rice. You put that together with this, epic ability to play and sing, and it's a very potent combination.
When you, in your mind's eye, if I ask you to picture Tony Rice, can you paint a picture for me of what you see?
I see a man who's so, I just see a man who's very focused and very clear-eyed. He had amazing eyes. They were very intense. But not in like a scary way. Sometimes people have eyes that are intense and it can be like a little bit like, whoa. His weren't like that. They were penetrating in a really warm way, in a very curious way. And so I whether you were talking to him or more often, the way I can just picture him sitting there thinking about something or talking about something, and his eyes kind of being a little open as he's just really thinking about and living fully in whatever that thought is. That's kind of how I picture him. There was so much time. Most of the time that I spent with him was like that. I mean, there wasn't a ton of time we spent together with the guitars in our hand, although there was some, but we spent time sitting next to each other on his couch listening to records and talking about it, or sitting next to him in his Mustang, Cobra, driving, to Colorado and back, or whatever. That was kind of the time that I logged with Tony, and that's kind of how I see him, as just being this really intelligent, clear thinking, slightly goofy in this really dry kind of way, just beautiful guy who I just loved every minute that I was in his presence.
I've been, these episodes have sort of been, what was originally supposed to be one episode has kind of turned into two, which is those who got like played with him, like Grisman and Bela and Sam and Jerry, and then like those who were influenced by him, mm-hmm. you and Josh and Thile and Molly and others. And what's been clear to me, and I said this to Thile as well, what's been clear to me in these interviews is just the legacy he leaves through you, like the legacy he leaves through you.
Yeah.
And how special that really is. So thank you for talking to us about this today.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, I'll talk about Tony any day. He's my guy.
It's a long way to the Delta from the North Georgia hills, and totes sack for ginseng won't pay no travel bill.
Thank you so much to Critter. I really appreciate the time, and you might know Critter as the guitarist for Punch Brothers. I also want to highlight the music you're hearing right now actually is this incredible duo he's in with Julian Lage. He also, along with Kristen Andreasen, performs the theme to Toy Heart, this podcast, and co-produced the most recent record by the Brightsiders, who are an incredible children's group, so make sure to check that out. Up next, Molly Tuttle. Molly Tuttle is an amazing guitar player in the bluegrass and sort of acoustic idioms, but the challenge presented by Molly is also sort of an opportunity, because Molly Tuttle didn't meet Tony Rice. She never spent time with him the way the other guests on this podcast have. But really, isn't that more meaningful? Because as Chris Thile said earlier, will Tony ever really die if his music lives on? And I believe his music lives on through people like Molly, who maybe didn't know him personally, but feel so inspired by him. We caught up with Molly Tuttle from Nashville. So Molly, I guess right off the bat, what went through your head when you heard that Tony had passed?
Well, I was pretty heartbroken over it because he was the person I remember being my first ever guitar hero when I was getting so into playing guitar, and I got to see him as a kid play, but I never got to meet him. And I think a lot of us who were really, really big fans of Tony and who he inspired, we were hoping he would reemerge and start playing shows again, because I hadn't seen him play in years, and he had just kind of gone quiet and wasn't performing. And so I think we were all a bit worried about his health and other things, but kind of holding out hope that he would come back and perform, and we'd all get to see him play again, which is always so amazing. So yeah, it was just really sad. And I went back and listened to his records and kind of remembered how I heard them for the first time and wanted to play guitar just like him. So yeah, it was a lot of feelings. I was actually visiting family at the time, which was nice because I got to hang out with my dad, and my dad's a huge Tony Rice fan. So we listened to his albums together and had a little jam and played his songs. And so that was really nice to have that connection.
What did you play?
We played Freeborn Man. I think we played Church Street Blues. We were just going through his records and remembering which songs we knew, and some of the stuff off the J.D. Crowe album. I forget exactly which ones. But yeah, we played a lot of his stuff.
Did your dad know him?
My dad, I think, had met him. My dad moved to the Bay Area from Illinois because he loved music. He wasn't like a professional musician, but he loved the Grisman Quintet and he loved Tony Rice. So he moved out to the Bay Area just because he was really interested in the music scene, and he wasn't doing music at the time, but he ended up getting to see Tony perform a lot. And he talks about one time with his band, he was in a band called the Griffin Quintet, and they played locally. And one time he played at a bar in San Francisco, and Tony was like sitting in the audience, which was really cool. And he said at the music store where my dad teaches lessons out of a music store, or he did until COVID, and now he teaches online. But he said they had Tony Rice's phone number written down because Tony had called them and said he wanted some guitar students and to send students his way. So my dad was saying he always regrets not like taking a lesson from Tony.
I didn't know Tony wanted to teach at all.
Yeah, I guess there was a period of time when he was teaching private lessons in the Bay Area, I didn't know that either.
Right, because I associate him so much so with North Carolina or with Tennessee. But yeah, he's Californian, and unlike yourself.
Yeah, it's so cool. And I think like at the time, maybe he wasn't touring very much and was just picking up students.
When did you first sort of become aware of Tony Rice? Like, what's your earliest memory of knowing that Tony Rice sort of existed?
I think I became aware of him probably a couple years after I started playing guitar, and I was getting more and more into it. And I remember asking my dad, like, hey, who are the bluegrass guitar players, who are like the most well-known bluegrass guitar players? And he mentioned Tony Rice. And then like I always heard a lot of music growing up because we'd put on records all the time. But I do remember my dad kind of like showing me some of his signature licks and putting on his records. I really remember hearing Freeborn Man for the first time because that has those guitar licks at the beginning. He like sings a line and then plays a fancy lick. And that I thought was so cool. I really wanted to learn how to play like that. Did you go
deep? Did you go note for note? Did you start transcribing?
A little bit. I had like this Tony Rice book of all his solos. I think it was called like Tony Rice Guitar or something. And so I did learn, I remember learning Plastic Banana. That was my first Tony Rice tune I learned. It might have just been his guitar record, like his really early solo record that he did. It had all of those. And then I remember learning his solo to Lonesome Fiddle Blues note for note as well. Those were the two that I worked on a lot as a kid.
I want to talk about like maybe what you took from that in just a second, but you mentioned you got to see him. Mm-hmm. Was that Harley Strictly in San Francisco? What do you remember from that?
I remember him standing on stage, and I mainly remember like the tone of his guitar and the way he stood really still on stage. He had this like kind of statuesque persona on stage where he like didn't move much, and his fingers, you could hardly see them move because it was so fluid. And he was just so cool and like chill as he played these amazing lines. And then I remember the tone of his guitar was so special to me. It like really rang in this amazing way that I don't think a lot of other people can make guitars sound like that. Like he definitely had a very distinctive tone with his playing.
What do you remember feeling when you saw him?
I remember feeling in awe of him, and just like he had this larger than life quality that I was just kind of, it felt really magnetic to me. I just wanted to watch him play and like hang on every note and really pay attention to what he was doing. And then I got to see him again when I went to IBMA once or twice, as I think I was probably 14 or 15, and I would fly out to Nashville to do the IBMA. They had like this kids thing. I think I did it maybe when I was 12 and 13. And I got to see him again there, and that playing with JD Crowe. And that was super cool too. I remember just knowing that like it was a rare opportunity to get to see him. So I was really paying close attention, and I got to see him like kind of walking around the hallways. And there was always this like mysterious air about him that really made me wonder about what he was like as a person, but I never got to meet him.
I'm so surprised.
Yeah, I think I was just really shy. I probably could have walked up to him and said hi, but he looked so, I don't know, he was like the most famous person in the world to me, basically.
Oh, really?
That's what I thought of him as. He's like a celebrity. He was like a celebrity when I was a kid.
Talk to me about his playing. And like, you can get as nerdy as you want here. Mm-hmm. What do you notice when you hear Tony Rice play guitar?
I think it goes back to when I first saw him play on stage, and what I notice is his tone. Like I think so many people learn his licks, and but when you hear him play those licks, it just sounds so different. Like the tone of the guitar he gets is so fluid. It's crystal clear. It has this really deep tone, and I think he can probably play, or he could probably play so many different guitars and still make it sound like himself. And then the fluidity that he plays with. And again, when you watch his hands, you hardly see them move. And when you watch his right hand, like it seems like he's playing using like his fingers in his right hand a lot with his picking instead of like his wrist or his elbow. He's playing with these small finger movements. And I think it's just he really worked it out so precisely, and that translates into the fluidity of his playing and how clean his notes are, and each one rings out until he plays the next one. They're not like chopped off at all. So yeah, I think he just worked so meticulously on his technique that it translates to his tone in a really interesting way.
Well, can we talk more about that? And I know that, what does Zappa say? Like talking about music is like dancing about architecture, but like, I can't help but notice and be struck by you saying that it may not have mattered what guitar he would pick up. Mm-hmm. He would be able to get the tone he wanted, the Tony Rice tone from it, which that says to me that it's coming from somewhere deeper. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that's what I take away from his music every time I hear it, is like you're getting a piece of who he is as a person that he's somehow translating through the music, like what he finds important, which might be playing with amazing tone, playing these fluid, creative lines, and like his singing that's so full of soul as well. You kind of get a sense for him as a person through his playing, and you get a sense for how many hours he spent with his guitar to make that unique sound.
I think there's something about coming to Nashville too, and just kind of hearing of the legend of Tony Rice. Did you find?
Yeah, I think like since moving to Nashville, you hear more stories about him. And I mean, growing up in California, where he spent so much of his career, the music scene is a bit more spread out, and not everyone is like obsessed with Tony Rice and bluegrass. But here in Nashville, of course, he's like in the bluegrass scene, he's a god basically. So yeah, I think being around, being in the music scene that he had such a big impact on, you get a sense that he's, just for how much of a influence he had on the music itself. I think he's one of the rare people that actually changed bluegrass music after the original guys who like Bill Monroe and Stanley Brothers and Flatt and Scruggs. Tony kind of created. Well, I guess he created the template for guitar players to follow. He had this amazing vocal that people have imitated. And I think just like the albums he made with the Bluegrass Album Band and with J.D. Crowe, so much of that became standard repertoire and people learned those versions of the songs. And his rhythm guitar playing too. I think so many people have imitated it. It's kind of created a new sound within bluegrass.
You're not the first person to say that. It's funny, you know, I find that folks who aren't maybe as steeped in bluegrass as you are, and the folks we're talking to from this thing will focus on Tony's leads, will focus on Tony's guitar solos. You're not the first person to say that it's his rhythm playing that can sometimes, it's subtler and maybe not as easy for someone to notice. And I can see you kind of smiling at the idea of his rhythm playing. Talk to me a little bit about Tony Rice's rhythm playing and maybe what you noticed there.
Yeah, I think his rhythm playing is incredibly dynamic. I love listening to songs where he's just playing rhythm, like Bury Me Beneath the Weeping Willow with Ricky Skaggs. He's just playing this super simple rhythm part. And in between their vocal lines, he comes in and just accents it at the right times with more up strums and brings up the dynamics, and his bass runs and G runs always come in. It's like interwoven with the song itself and with his singing. And you hear that on Church Street Blues too. He plays these cool cross-picking solos, and then he weaves in those cross-picking lines with his rhythm playing as well. And I think when you listen to him play in a full band too, like when he's playing in the Grisman Quintet or playing with on Bela Fleck's albums, the way he plays with time, he like pushes it forward. And I think he just kind of holds down the rhythm in a way that makes everyone lock in with him and makes the band lock together. And he just kind of makes everyone else sound better with his rhythm playing.
How did he influence you?
I feel like he influenced me partially indirectly through my dad, since my dad was such a big fan and kind of learned a lot of Tony Rice licks and songs. And then my dad was my guitar teacher. So through him, I realized later that a lot of the stuff he was teaching me were like Tony Rice licks and songs that Tony Rice played. And then as I discovered his music for myself, I just held him as the standard of great bluegrass guitar playing. And the amount of detail he puts into his playing and his own unique voice, I think that inspired me to want to make a sound that was my own as well. I didn't try to like copy him exactly, but I definitely wanted to play clean like him, but also have my own voice in the way that you can hear his playing and know that it's him. I really wanted that as well with my guitar playing.
I think that was important to him. Like, I think he talked about, I think he didn't want imitators either. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What do you think his legacy will be in the music?
I think a lot of it that I see is people playing his licks, trying to sound like him. But again, like going back to that essence of him as a musician and wanting to stand out and maybe not wanting, I don't know whether or not he wanted people to imitate his playing, but I think he just, on like another level, he will keep inspiring people to push themselves to the limits of their abilities and to really have their own voice. I think when you get deep into Tony's music, you realize how much love he has for music and for sharing that part of himself with the world. So I think that's how he inspired others as well to really be their best selves in their music and share their unique style with the world.
Do me a favor, and maybe this is a good way to end it. When you picture Tony Rice, do me a favor and picture Tony Rice in your head, mm-hmm. and paint me a picture of what you see.
I see him standing kind of stoically in the suit that it seems like he was always wearing this black suit that was simple but very elegant, and with his classic ponytail, light brown hair, and just holding a dreadnought guitar. I'm imagining the one that was Clarence White's guitar, so a worn dreadnought guitar, and just being very stoic but very like you can tell he's very wise and has a lot to say with that guitar that he's holding.
Molly, it's a pleasure to talk to you. And, throughout this episode, we've been talking to people who were influenced by him, and it's only given me, greater faith that even though he's gone, his music's not gone. Through the folks I'm talking to today, like yourself. So thanks for your time, and take care of yourself.
Yeah, great talking to you.
Thank you so much to Molly Tuttle. I know I said it a couple of times at the beginning and even in the interview, but you really do get that feeling, right? That like Tony's music is going to live on through folks like Molly. Thank you so much to Molly Tuttle for her time, and definitely check out her music. It's absolutely incredible. Our final guest of part 3, our final part of our tribute to Tony Rice, is none other than Bryan Sutton. And I want to give a shout out before we talk too much about Bryan. Bryan Sutton did, in my opinion, the first big tribute to Tony Rice. Shortly after Tony Rice died, Bryan hosted on Facebook a 3-hour show where people were calling in, musicians were zooming in to talk a little bit about Tony's influence. So Bryan comes to Tony not just as an admirer, not just as a friend, not just as a contemporary, but also as someone who has taken in the stories and experiences and spirit of Tony Rice and is ready to talk a little bit about him. Bryan is an incredible guitarist. You might know him as the guitarist for Ricky Skaggs' Kentucky Thunder when the Bluegrass Rules record came out, but since then he's gone on to become perhaps the preeminent bluegrass guitarist of his era. And he joined us to talk about his hero, Tony Rice. I guess right off the bat I should say I'm just so sorry for your loss.
Well, thank you. Yeah, bluegrass is a family, and although I wasn't related to Tony Rice, and different folks I've talked to for the last week or so, it feels like a family loss. It feels, especially talking to, I talked to Mike Marshall yesterday, who's over there in Germany, and it's just kind of a little bit, it feels a little disconnected. And so chatted with him a little while, and it was sad, we're sharing tears and stories, and it hits, it's one of those things where it hits at various levels in various parts of the day, but there's a lot of this too that I think personally and professionally, recognizing that Tony Rice had in effect retired and was, his years of consistent output had stopped, but there was still, I think in some of us maybe a hope that he would be able to show up somewhere to do something. And but at the end of the day too, and that's been part of the, again, just sharing a conversation with friends of mine, just so thankful for any time I had with him. And it's always weird to have heroes as your friends, just because even without that, I'd still feel the same way, just still connected to bluegrass and connected to all those years of studying those records backwards and forwards.
It can be scary, having your heroes as your friends, because you can get close to them, and they can, it can be, but by all accounts, he lived up to the myth surrounding him, in such a beautiful way.
Yeah. And even maybe surpass them just because it's the enigmatic spirit of Tony Rice was large and, it was beautiful, so it's just various angles to kind of process that. But, he was always a real pal to me and a support. And I don't think anybody ever really got really close to him, but for what we had, it was really good.
What's your earliest memory of kind of knowing that Tony Rice existed?
Knowing that Tony Rice existed. Wow. Growing up in Western North Carolina, it was heavy Doc Watson in my house. And then I grew up around this kind of music, playing guitar with my dad. And then, in a huge community of players, and flat picking was a normal thing. We all did it. And and that, you know, the first few years for me were just being immersed in that world that was already, you know, well established. And then I remember this guy named Ted White, who was another sort of fixture and continues to be a fixture in the Western North Carolina Asheville music scene. He said, "Have you heard this guy, Tony Rice?" And we were in a local music store where that sold albums. And I said, "No." And he said, "We ought to check him out." And I guess this was probably mid 80s at this point. And so that led to sort of the first cassette buying, and then learning about Tony Rice.
Springsteen refers to Like a Rolling Stone, the snare drum at the beginning of Like a Rolling Stone, as the crack of the sound of your mind opening.
Right.
It feels like with guitar pickers, especially hearing Tony Rice for the first time, there is that same sort of crack, that sort of like increasing of the limitations around the instrument, or decreasing of the limitations around the instrument.
Yeah, right. You know, bluegrass guitar is a very physical thing. In a bluegrass band, it's the quietest instrument compared to banjos and mandolins and fiddles. And any bluegrass guitar player will talk about the struggles of being heard and the struggles of feeling like, you know, you're having enough impact compared to all these other things. And that's the magic of Tony, is that you never really felt that, you know, even, you know, watching him live and knowing that there's electronics involved in studio mixing and live mixing. But just the way that he managed to sort of sonically exist in the mix of a bluegrass band, that's, I mean, to the sound of the crack of the snare, that's, to me, that's the Tony Rice imprint, is the little bass runs behind the banjo licks and the G runs at the end of phrases and the raise of the profile at the end of the vocal phrases. And it's just this intricate mixing where it's not just all loud, but when it's there, it's huge, you know, and it drives the music forward so much. And so again, as a player, you look at that and go, how can I do that? How can he do that? And so the crack of the snare is your mind opening, but also the gauntlet raised, or the challenge being issued. Like, can I do that? You know, and that's been a lot of my life in bluegrass, is trying to figure out that mix and either recreate it or have my own version of it or something like that.
When did you first meet?
Here. That was July of 1989.
Where were you?
15-year-old me at Doyle Lawson's Bluegrass Festival in Denton, North Carolina. And it was actually the first festival that I'd ever really been to, for a sort of pro level festival. And you kind of left the parking lot, walked over this hill, and it kind of revealed this amphitheater down there. And Jim and Jesse were on stage at the time when the day we got there. But it was just so many, again, to that mind opening snare crack that Bruce Springsteen talks about, just the visual in front of me of those bands, those nationally recognized bands that had existed in magazines and, you know, albums and cassette tapes. And then there's Tony Rice Unit. And again, just the sound of the guitar in that little amphitheater, sort of a covered shed kind of thing, was just so impactful. I mean, every note just cracked. Every note was a snare drum. And it was huge. It was amazing. And again, through that weekend was opportunities to, you know, that was basically taken backstage.
Did you walked up to him, you introduced yourself?
I think so, yeah.
Sounds terrifying.
I know it was. Well, my mom, she's a good encourager. And I think that she probably encouraged me to go meet him, because as soon as you leave the stage, there's this little sort of side trailer where all the, you know, the instrument cases are being stored, where folks kind of leave the public and transition into performance. But right outside of that was, you know, record tables. And that's also where I met all the guys in Hot Rise for the first time. And you know, a few other people, but But it was, that's the cool thing about bluegrass is how accessible everybody is. And it wasn't weird. And I remember there was somebody else backstage in one of the other bands that was playing Tony's guitar. And I'm like, you can't do that. You can't touch Tony Rice's guitar.
Before you did the duets with him, which I definitely want to talk about, did you get to play with him before that? Did you get to jam with him or anything?
Yeah. So, like fast forward, if that's 1989, by 95 and 6, now I'm with Ricky Skaggs' band. And
kind of blowing people away. I'm not to talk on your behalf, but that felt like a certain crack moment as well. Your solos on Get Up John and Rawhide on Bluegrass Rules. It was the first big guitar player I had heard who wasn't Tony, who wasn't Doc. It was a big moment for bluegrass guitar as well. Just for people listening, I'll point that out.
Well, thank you.
I can do that.
Okay. Well, it was through that connection with Ricky where I, again, found myself on stage at Merl Fest and various places around where Tony was also booked. And there was, Skaggs would generally invite Tony on stage. And there's some photos of my first set at Merl Fest with Ricky where Tony's up there playing too. And then there was a couple of other, or at least one other jam where Ricky was involved, where I was on stage with Tony. And that was probably the first time I had an opportunity to play with him on stage in real time. And that led to just other things throughout the sort of mid to late 90s of just us crossing a lot of paths, and mainly at festivals.
Would you talk about guitar? I know he would talk a lot about music. He would talk a lot about jazz. He would listen to jazz with a lot of people. Did you talk about guitar?
Well, here's the other weird thing about that era is that we at these festivals, it was mainly like, okay, let's figure out something to do and go out on stage and play it, and then let's have a fun time and we'll see you later. Again, growing up in Asheville, there was a studio there, and I was always interested in being a session musician. And to try to go really quickly here, Tony also was connected to folks that were working there. And there were some groups there like the Isaacs, who were sort of a bluegrass gospel group. Mm-hmm. And he produced their record there at the studio. And that was one of the other first chances I had to not just be guitars in hand, let's go out and play something, where we were standing having coffee and talking about stuff. Or those were other memories of sitting in his car listening to Chuck Loeb. And he would just point out, this is really good, just the use of space. He wasn't trying to teach me anything. It was just, he would talk about what he liked about whatever this was. And it couldn't be farther from bluegrass. And that was when my mind was first opened a little bit more to, the whole sort of spectrum of Tony, because I was aware of his playing outside of just traditional bluegrass, but to hear him kind of talk about it a little bit was really cool. And then as some of these other years, I'd moved away from Asheville, but was still going back there to that studio to do some work. And he would be there from time to time. And there would be lunch breaks and just sitting around the studio with his guitar. And I mentioned that story the other night about, there was different ones of us that would play that thing on the same mics. And then he sat down and the snare would crack again. And it was just a lot of, so the point is, Tom, a lot of little series of moments where there wasn't some big sit down, like Critter had that whole, month with him, but it was a collection of just little things, little instances, little discussions, little questions and answers, and little musical moments that kind of all, in their own little way, kind of built to a little more of a relationship.
I don't know if you'll have the answer to this, but I feel like you might have the closest to it. Did Doc and Tony have a relationship?
Yeah. I can't speak for either of them to know really what was there, but I know that, they did some pretty great recordings over the years, and there's some good live stuff on YouTube, and there's some other sort of bootleg festival tapes of them hanging around. And I know that Tony had the utmost respect for Doc, and Doc had huge respect for Tony as well. And then there's Norman Blake in the mix of all these just other stuff that's out there.
And Clarence, I guess I've been reflecting so much on Clarence Not just that the guitar he plays is is Clarence's, but I've been listening to a lot of. I listened to that Mule Skinner when I was getting ready to talk to Peter Rowan. I listened to the Mule Skinner. Someone gave me the VHS tape actually, and I had to find a VCR.
Yeah, and
I dug it out and I watched the Mule Skinner. But they were opening for Monroe or something like that, or maybe it was Ralph Stanley, and they didn't show.
I don't remember. It sounds right.
And this is, again, I'll have more answerable questions in a second, but I wonder if you could talk as a guitar player about Tony in the context or lineage of Clarence and Doc.
Well, I mean, when I've talked to Norman and Tony, I think everybody sort of looks at Doc as sort of an original source as far as the guitar in an acoustic string band playing leads, and playing leads at a level where there was intricacy and, single note flurries and then some improvisational, energies here and there. And so, I think Doc is the source ultimately. And there was people, and he would point to Hank Garland and some other folks before him even that sort of, were Doc's influences, but anyway, as far as this our scene here, Doc does seem to be the source. And then as far as Clarence, I've seen interviews with him talking about Doc Watson just as that's where people first got wind of what you could do with an acoustic guitar and a string band as far as playing fiddle tunes and solos on Jimmy Rogers songs and things like that. But and as far as other things going on too was Norman Blake, with John Hartford and then there was some other people like Don Reno in the world of bluegrass and
George Shuffler,
certainly George Shuffler and Larry Sparks. So that the guitar was around. That was another thing, part of our discussion with Dan Creer the other day. It didn't make that final little edit, but he was talking about how even back then, still guitar lead was kind of a novelty. If you went to a bluegrass festival, you remember seeing Larry Sparks with Ralph Stanley over a festival where Larry didn't take a break just because it was, I don't know, it's just the songs they chose, but it just wasn't like, we've got to have a guitar solo at all these moments. So that, as far as the energy and the kind of the normalcy of just guitars taking breaks, it was still kind of a new thing, even when Norman and Clarence were kind of using Doc's initial energy to kind of play more bluegrass in front of people and take more solos. And then Clarence died in 1973. And it does seem like, Tony sort of emerged out of that shadow of Clarence in those early to mid 70s, 73 to 75. It seems like an interesting span of years from when Clarence died. And then there's that 0044 J.D. Crowe record in 75. And then, Tony had gotten hooked up with J.D. even before that with the Kentucky Mountain Boys with his brother Larry. So it's just an interesting, just all the fusion going on there and all the people kind of filtering around. That whole Lexington, Kentucky scene is amazing. Just the 70s in Lexington, just huge for bluegrass.
Can you tell me a little bit about duetting with Tony on your record?
The whole process was kind of frenetic, a little bit like that thing we did Sunday, where it's just a lot of calls and we'll see what happens.
A hard guy to reach too, from what I understand, but a lot of people have told me, yeah.
He would be pretty good about, he would never pick up the phone immediately, but he would generally call you back if he could. And sometimes it wouldn't be till like 11 at night or something like that. But he was totally friendly and amenable about it. And we met at that studio in Asheville that I was talking about. And my goal for that, again, was just a opportunity to record duet style with all these, hero guitar players. And certainly he was top of the list there. And kind of knew exactly what I wanted to do, not necessarily exactly what song, but sort of what's Tony's role in this list with Doc Watson and Earl Scruggs and David Greer and all these people, George Shuffler. and knew what kind of song I'd like to play with him, but didn't know how it would go down. And so he was just really, really great. We just played. And in fact, there's 2 songs on the record.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some other stuff that I found a few years ago that I forgot that we cut just sitting around noodling. Part of what's on that thing from Sunday is a version of Wayfaring Stranger that, there's like 7 minutes of it that I have of just he and I sitting around playing. So, he got there and he wanted to play, and it wasn't like, okay, you got 20 minutes and I'm going to go back to Reidsville. He was there, he was present, and was willing to do whatever.
Did you notice something new being that close to his playing that you hadn't noticed before?
I had a little bit of a goal as a self-producer to feel like, I know that I'm influenced by him, and I didn't want to just sit there and copy what he did. But what I was hoping to kind of do was encourage him to stretch. And so I feel like there were moments where I felt that happening and I felt good about it. I'm like, okay, cool, it's happening. Because I know the Rice vocabulary and the system that's there, and it's beautiful and it's great, but I also know that, that he can kind of manipulate that on his own. And I was trying to figure out ways to allow him to feel comfortable enough to do that, not verbally, but just, is there anything I can do musically or just vibe wise in the tune to just get into this communication with him where it feels comfortable. Communication is that way. It's there's always kind of a gap between you and whoever you're talking to, or when it's right, it's real open and flows freely. And that's what I was hoping for, because I knew, again, it would lead to him in some more natural sort of stretch moments.
So what did you do? What did you do? Did you?
I don't know, Tom, specifically. It may have been, again,
I'm just dying to know, I'm dying to know if you, yeah.
I think, on the more, like the jazz level, the more improvisational musical conversation level, it was about reacting to him in a way that wasn't parroting what he had just done, but like encouraging this kind of like elevation, like, okay, you're going to do this, and I can do this against that. It's not that, but it's responsive to that. And if you're listening to that too, you might go here. And there was some of that. And again, it's just like a conversation. That I tried not to just be too, oh, you said that. Tony Rice said that. That's cool. I'm just going to, record that and go on. I mean, I really was not pushing him, but also, trying to go for some stuff. And part of the challenge for me was to allow that to happen too. And I know it kind of gets deep sounding quickly, but it really is about an improvisational musical conversation. And I guess the hard part about it, it's where a guy like me and Critter are going to go naturally, no matter what. And any of the instances I had playing with Tony, I had to get over the fact that that's Tony Rice. And so that was part of what I did too, was just get over it, and show up and play, and it'll be there and it'll be great.
I'll ask you a few questions that I've asked everybody so far. And first up is, when was the last time you talked to him?
It was backstage at one of the IBMA events in Raleigh. I don't remember what year. I don't think it was the year that he was in the Hall of Fame, inducted in the Hall of Fame. It may have been after that even. I don't remember, actually. But I remember it was sweet, and it was kind of sad. He was talking about how he was struggling with his playing, and he said, I can play downstrokes, but I can't. I really struggle playing upstrokes. I mean, it kind of got into guitar discussion. And I remember it being kind of sad. Not that I was thinking this is the last time I'm going to see Tony Rice, but it was just, I mean, again, I feel weird saying this because it may or may not be true, but I feel like just us sitting there talking about that, he was getting a little emotional about it. And again, I don't know if I was just imagining that or if that was real, but he also had like just some really heartfelt things to say to me, and it, it felt like a good, honest conversation with a pal about life, and that was it.
What was he like?
That's a good question. When I just think about him as a person, I think about the guy that you would see and he would do the, hey, and put his hands up and he'd come over and hug you and how's it shaking? And, it was just jovial, right? He has, you see those pictures of him kind of just real stern on stage. But, he was, I don't know if he was a life of the party kind of guy, at least when I was around him, but he was always had a smile, always had, a laugh and all this kind of stuff. Just a real good energy. I never was around him either long enough professionally to sort of see him in any kind of, I'm struggling here, or I wish this was this way, and that kind of thing. And I know, like with, acoustic music, stage monitors can be trouble. And, I've just seen him on stage, like really get sort of, irate with sound crews and things like that. And, I know he has the capacity had the capacity for that, but I never saw any of that personally. I don't know that anybody really knew Tony. I mean, even thinking about conversations I've had with some of his peers over the years, and just, always feeling a little bit of that gap or that tendency of his to be totally there and engaged, but yet when we're done, the Mustang is hot. And wonder about, whether it was the swarm of fans or whatever it was, just that solitude that he really sought after. And I mean, again, like to Critter's point of just how he would sit for hours or even days just down in his basement with his hi-fi rig, just soaking up in records. I guess that's where he found balance. I don't know, is in those moments where it was, I remember him telling me one time he liked it driving in the middle of the night through states like Kansas, just because the speed limit was like 75 or something. He liked to go fast. Maybe it gave him a sense of control that he didn't have, when it was chaos, on the festival grounds. I will say this though, one of the cooler things, it wasn't the Mustang, it was the town car where we were at Merl Fest. I was back there. Did I say this with my dad? And they were introducing him, and that's about the time he drove up. The band was on stage, and he was just he was still in the car, and he lit this cigarette, and the window went down about 3 inches, and you could just see, ladies and gentlemen, the Tony Rice unit, and there he is. So there was he was basking in that.
What made Tony Rice's music so special? I'm saving the hard ones till late, Brent.
Yeah, no. What made his music so special?
His playing, his.
Yeah, I mean, it's for me as a student of that kind of music and that kind of playing. What I go to on a regular basis is kind of what I said, some of what I said earlier, just this inherent knowledge of how to fit yourself in the puzzle that is a bluegrass band, sonically, dynamically. The sound of the notes, the fidelity and the impact, the length of the notes, to get really inside of it, to me are sort of gold standard level things that, and this is one of the interesting things about like the way music and generations work, is I don't know that I just feel that way because it's just what I've had imprinted into my brain, and maybe somebody will come along in the future and beat it. But it feels like when he, again, was in that era of doing what he did at the top of his game, it was done. It's hard to imagine that a D28 played with a flat pick could be better. I don't know that I've ever heard it. I don't know. And so on that level of just a human and a tool, that is something that will continually challenge and inspire me. And then just to unpack that into layers of choices and why did that happen? what was, why did he choose that? Why, trying to answer all the whys and take it beyond just transcribing solos, which I, again, never really did. Try to understand more of like the essence of why that note or why that phrase works there. And then again, on the strumming and the rhythm front, I love the way Dan Tominski puts it, where like all his favorite banjo solos are his favorite banjo solos because Tony Rice is playing rhythm. You realize, right? And that's, for me, that's kind of a final piece of the puzzle that I don't know that I'll ever feel like I truly unpack. And again, I actively try not to copy Tony, but there's just such a, kind of like with the tone thing, there's just such an undeniable doneness about it. Like, this can't be any better. You can't experience that with more intricacy and subtleties and nuance, but also a raw kind of power and placement and dynamic.
When you, in your mind, picture Tony Rice, what do you see? Can you tell me, can you describe to me what you see in your mind's eye?
Mm-hmm. I sort of see the suit, and I mean, if you really want to unpack it, it's a smell. There's a lot of aftershave or cologne or something that anytime you're around him, the case, kind of wafts, and there's a smell. And on the sonic front, to me too, in the mind's ear, and this is something that this is something I've done with Guitar Heroes over the years, is sort of like encapsulate it down to kind of one thing that I could maybe think to apply in my playing. Like with Doc Watson, it's just clarity. And in Tony Rice, it's like this smoke, like a smokiness, like a wood smoke. I don't know why, but I like when there's a term we use thinking about tone. It's a dry guitar tone, and you can almost hear the dust on the notes, and like there's a smokiness to it. So that's all in my brain quickly with Tony Rice.
I think that I'm grateful for your time, and you've been very generous. And I've been, I made a little playlist after he passed, of just some of my favorite Tony Rice moments, and it ended up being 3 hours.
Yeah.
And I'm not even done, and I've been reflecting so much on his playing, and Chris and I were talking, Thile and I were talking about, what happens when, monumental musicians die and how their music carries on through those who play it. And I just wanted to say, he leaves a legacy through people like you. And I hear him, and he won't go as long as we hear him through people like you. So thanks so much for your time, and I appreciate you talking about it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much to Bryan Sutton. I can't recommend enough. If you enjoyed this 3-part series, this tribute to Tony Rice, check out Bryan's 3-hour-long tribute to Tony Rice. It is absolutely incredible. Go find it. It's on Facebook. Just look up Bryan Sutton on Facebook and you'll be able to find it there. Thank you so much for listening. Toy Heart is produced by Stephanie Coleman and me, Tom Power. Our executive producer is Amy Reitenauer Jacobs, with help, as always, from the entire BGS team, like producer Chris Jacobs, associate editor Justin Hiltner, managing editor Craig Shelburne, and all of the amazing writers and contributors that make BGS the best source for roots culture redefined. Discover more at thebluegrasssituation.com. The show was mixed by Stephanie Coleman and Mike Laval, transcription by Rob McLaren. Our theme song, Toy Heart by Bill Monroe, was performed by Chris Eldridge and Kristen Andreasen. If this is your first time listening, you can hear full interviews with folks like Del McCurry, Alice Gerard, and Jesse McReynolds in the podcast feed, as I mentioned off the top, and click subscribe and tell any of your friends that are into bluegrass music. This is the last, I guess you'll you'll hear from us for a little while. We weren't really expecting to do any more podcasts until the border opened back up, because I feel tempted to sit down and do some of these interviews over Zoom, and maybe someday I'll be convinced, but like there's nothing like sitting down in front of these folks and getting to talk to them. So I really want to do it the right way. I hope you understand, and I hope you can be patient with us. But in the meantime, thank you so much for listening. My deepest gratitude to every single person who came on the show to talk about Tony Rice. Sometimes these were folks who found it hard to talk about Tony Rice. Sometimes it was the first time they had talked about Tony Rice since his passing, and it means the absolute world to me. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you to Tony Rice for the joy you gave me and the joy you gave so many of us with your music. So take care. See you soon. Later on.